I am the life and death brother of the gangster boss. But I have a crush on him. After he died, I raised his son. Who knew this rebellious son didn't treat me as his uncle and broke into my hotel room. I grabbed the hair of the young boy kneeling beside my bed, threw him out the door, and asked me coldly, "You don't plan to be a widow for my father?" I warned sharply, "Samuel Reed." Not only was he not afraid, but he pushed me down on the bed like a madman. "Then why don't you let me do it?" 01. Samuel was wearing his school uniform, sitting on a pile of steel scrap in the alley, reading a book. Not far behind him, a massive fight was going on. The sound of punches hitting flesh was mixed with a few groans of pain. If the situation wasn't so incongruous, I might really believe that he was working hard. I raised my hand to dismiss the thugs behind me who had rolled up their sleeves and were ready to fight, and I also retreated from the corner. 20 minutes ago, Daniel rushed into the office and told me that the young master had a fight with someone. I thought Samuel was different from his father. He was good at studying and never caused trouble. I was afraid that he would suffer any loss, so I urged the driver to drive fast all the way. But the situation was completely different from what I expected. "That's all right." Inside, Samuel's cold voice came. The young men who helped him beat people seemed unwilling to give in, but they stopped obediently and left. I stopped them at a distance and asked them what was going on. They rushed to tell me that the guy was a pervert and was obsessed with Samuel to an abnormal degree. He stalked Samuel every day and sent him very explicit love letters. At noon today, Samuel borrowed our dormitory to take a nap, and he sneaked in. If he hadn't been discovered in time, his hand would have been in Samuel's pants. So disgusting. My face turned pale when I heard this. After they left, I loosened my tie and tucked it into my lapel, wanting to teach that bad guy a lesson myself. But at the end of the alley, Samuel lifted the man's chin with his toes and said, "You said you like me?" I stopped. That man was also crazy, with blood between his teeth, but he was still smiling. "It's not like, it's love." "Samuel, I love you." Samuel said, "But we are all men. This is love." The man was stepped on by him, his eyes became more fanatical. "Things that go against the world are truly precious. Samuel, who else besides me is willing to be condemned by thousands of people for you?" "Yeah." Samuel thought for a moment. "It seems to make sense." The man's eyes suddenly lit up and he grabbed Samuel's trouser leg tightly. "So Samuel, will you give me a chance?" Samuel lowered his long eyelashes and looked at his hands. A beautiful smile appeared on his face. His voice was very gentle when he spoke again. "Thank you for making me suddenly enlightened." Upon hearing that, the man smiled, but it was only halfway open when it froze. His two screams echoed in the alley. The first sound was because Samuel squatted down and broke the fingers that were holding him. The second time, because Samuel stood up and kicked him in the ribs expressionlessly. The setting sun brushed over Samuel, a thick golden color that swallowed up his outline. I was in a trance at that moment. Matthew was very fierce in fighting. People in the underworld were afraid of him and called him Jade-Faced Yama. I always thought that although Samuel was a little cold-tempered, he was still a gentleman after all and did not inherit much of Matthew's fierceness. But I didn't expect that he hid it so well. I was too busy to help, so I took the person home. Someone was specially assigned to clean up the mess. During dinner, I said to Samuel, "Don't worry, a pervert like that will never appear in front of you again." "Pervert?" Samuel suddenly looked at me intently. "Uncle Phillips, don't you like men too?" I was stunned by his words. Although we are about to enter the millennium and the century is about to turn a page, it is still shameful to like men. His father Adam Hernandez used to be very disgusted by this. He said that a good man who was thinking about another man all day was a pure psychopath. Therefore, I never dared to reveal my feelings to him, for fear that he would know and chop off the meat between my legs and feed it to the dog. Samuel then said, "Don't you like my dad?" I shuddered and my voice rose an octave. "Don't talk nonsense, how is it possible?" In order to change the subject, I stuffed a lot of food into his bowl. "Don't just talk, eat more. You are growing up now. Don't be so polite all the time. It will affect your development." Samuel was picking at his rice nonchalantly. I'm an adult now, why am I still growing? How could I know? I just exclaimed, huh. Samuel just looked at me and smiled inexplicably. How else do you want me to develop, Uncle Phillips? At that moment, I almost suspected that this guy was talking to me in an improper way. But when I looked up, I saw him pick up a shrimp and peel it slowly. His serious yet elegant look made me deeply regret my doubt for a second. What's wrong? He raised the shrimp he had peeled. Do you want to eat? After saying that, he handed the shrimp directly to my mouth. I subconsciously opened my mouth and bit it, and he handed me several more one after another. I didn't know when he finished peeling them. He quickly stuffed my mouth full, and I couldn't chew it fast enough. I could only refuse vaguely. Okay, you yourself. His hand reached out again. I opened my mouth reluctantly, but this time I didn't bite the shrimp at all, but directly bit Samuel's finger. I was stunned, and the next second I saw him calmly retract his hand, put the finger that I accidentally bit into his mouth and licked it, then picked up the hot towel on the table to wipe his hands. You ate it all, said Samuel. Ahem. The vaguely visible pink tongue was still dangling in my mind, so I quickly looked away, picked up the water cup and took a big sip. I told you to eat more, but you insisted on stuffing it into my mouth. It doesn't matter. There was a glimmer of smile in Samuel's eyes that made me suspect it was an illusion. I just love feeding you my food. 03. While I was taking a shower, I suddenly realized that the ring Matthew gave me was missing. Matthew was wearing the ring himself at the time, and then one day when he saw me staring at it, he took it off and gave it to me. Actually, I didn't like the ring. I just thought to myself that it would be nice if one day I could be like that ring and be rubbed and touched by Matthew's handsome hands whenever I wanted. When Matthew took off the ring and gave it to me, I refused, saying it was too expensive and I couldn't accept it. When he heard that, he laughed and said, "We're good brothers, why are you arguing with me about money? If you like it, just take it." After saying that, he took my hand and put the ring on my index finger without saying anything. At that moment my heart was pounding, and I absurdly imagined that I was performing the ring exchange ceremony with him, and the blood was rushing to my face like crazy. When did the ring disappear? I remember that a few days ago, Samuel seemed to want to see it, so I took it off and gave it to him, and then, later, the company had some urgent matters and I went to deal with them. What happened after that? Did he give me the ring back? Samuel came to my room and I asked him, "Have you seen my ring?" "What ring?" Samuel asked. "Is it a token of your love for my father? This matter cannot be avoided, right?" I was helpless. If this is really a token of love, how could your father have your mother, and how could you be born? Samuel had a blank expression on his face. What's so strange about that? It's not like my mom is his only lover. I mean, he only likes women. Never mind. You asked me to show you the ring. Did you return it to me after you saw it? I have returned it. That's really strange. I searched the bathroom and the room thoroughly, and finally even knelt on the ground, crawled with my upper body down, and felt under the bed with a flashlight. But no, not anywhere. I stood up disappointed. Samuel asked, "Did you find it?" I shook my head, sat down on the edge of the bed, and took out a cigarette from the cigarette box with some annoyance. "Then don't look for it." Samuel stood in front of me, slightly bent over, and obediently brought the lighter to me. "You like to wear rings, I'll buy it for you. Come on, who gave you the money?" I smiled. Not wanting him to think that I was abnormally concerned about his father's things, I didn't say anything more about it. I just took a deep breath of the cigarette. Samuel snapped the metal cover of the lighter shut and put it back in his pocket. I wanted to ask him where he got the lighter and whether he had learned to smoke, but when I glanced over, I found that he seemed, "TSK, I'm really at the age where I can burst with excitement just by looking at a magazine girl on the street." I bit the cigarette holder and smiled. "Did you secretly watch something inappropriate for children? The sweatpants are quite loose, but you can still see their shape. It seems to be developing very well. What is considered inappropriate for children?" Samuel asked me calmly. "Does it count as you kneeling in front of me with your butt raised just now?" I almost choked to death on the puff of smoke I just inhaled. "Who did you learn this from?" I kicked his calf hard. You even dare to tease your uncle? I don't dare. Samuel didn't dodge at all, and he was very strong. He was able to stand straight even after I kicked him. He seemed to smile, looked down at me and asked, "Uncle Phillips, the light in my room is broken, can I sleep at your place tonight?" 04. Samuel is afraid of the dark, but he is not clingy. He was only 12 years old when Matthew died, but he never asked me to sleep with him. He just turned on a small wall lamp in his room every night. When I have time, I will take the initiative to accompany him. He will nestle next to me very comfortably and must be very close to me, lying on his side facing me, with his face buried in my arms, biting a piece of cloth on my chest, often soaking a large area of my clothes. When I don't have time, I will go to his room to take a look before going to bed. Sometimes he couldn't sleep well in the dim light, and only when I patted him gently would he slowly relax from his tense state. There's a reason Samuel is afraid of the dark. When he was very young, Matthew took him to a restaurant for dinner. They ran into a group of people from other clubs with whom he had a feud. A fight broke out after a few words. In the chaos, Matthew stuffed little Samuel under the table in the corner and told him not to make any noise or move. So Samuel hugged his knees and hid in the small dark area surrounded by the tablecloth and really didn't move. Outside there were swords, guns, sticks, and a bloody storm. Someone was chopped to the ground and fell in front of Samuel with his body twitching. Blood foamed from his mouth, and his eyes did not close until he died, staring at him straight through the gap under the tablecloth. Blood spread from under the man, flowing under the table and soaking the soles of Samuel's shoes. Samuel remained silent and did not move. Later, the fight ended tragically and Samuel was forgotten. I was not with Matthew that day. When Matthew was sent home after his knife wounds were bandaged, I suddenly felt something was wrong and asked him, "Where is Samuel?" Matthew slapped his head. "It's broken." It was already late at night, and I hurried to the restaurant that had been smashed beyond recognition. When I lifted the tablecloth, I saw little Samuel looking up at me, his face full of numbness and emptiness. I was heartbroken, so I took him out, held him in my arms and comforted him softly. "It's home, Samuel. Don't be afraid, I'm here to take you home." Samuel remained quiet the entire time, not saying anything about being scared or anything else. It was a long time before I realized that my clothes were a little wet. He cried in my arms, bit my clothes and shed many tears, but no sound came out. He was just a child at that time. I comforted him, hugged him, coaxed him, and even kissed his face. But now he is a grown man with a slender and strong body, and it makes me very uncomfortable to see him lying so closely to me in bed with his arms around my waist. I patted his hand and asked, "Aren't you hot?" He said, "I'm scared, Uncle Phillips." I said, "Then turn on the light?" "No, it's too bright and I'm afraid you won't be able to sleep." Samuel buried his face in my shoulder. "This is good." I had to try hard to ignore the heat coming from behind me, close my eyes and count sheep silently. It was a terrible sleep. I seemed to have had a very bad dream, but the dream felt too real. I dreamed that someone was rubbing against me from behind, and I could hear heavy breathing in my ears. I felt very anxious and hot, and could not help but humming softly until a hand covered my mouth. "Legs, keep them together." The man fiddled with my legs and ordered. An indescribable numbness arose, and my legs unconsciously clamped the quilt tightly. "Uncle Phillips." The breathy calls were like a hot and wet tongue licking my ears. I fell into a sticky mess that was hard to stir. When I woke up the next day, Samuel was still hugging me from behind. The man's reaction in the morning was very obvious. As soon as I moved slightly, he arched forward instinctively. I froze. Last night's dream was embarrassing enough, and I was easily aroused again so early in the morning. I couldn't help but despise myself. I pushed the person off my body and rushed into the bathroom. 05. In the basement, the traitor who had just been found was severely tortured. He was a tough guy, which made me very angry for a while. I walked out of the elevator, touching my red finger bones, and when I looked up, I saw Samuel at the office door. He was wearing a school uniform and carrying a school bag neatly. He looked like a clean and fresh student, which made the glittering passage of the gambling house look so tacky. I took the cigarette out of my mouth and kicked the person next to me. I told you to report when the young master comes, but you ignored my words? No, I can't stop you. Don't blame him, Uncle Phillips. Samuel spoke for him. I want to see you soon. When I saw him, I remembered the dream that night that seemed real but unreal, and I felt irritated. Samuel walked towards me. His hands touched my chest. I subconsciously raised my hand to block it, but he moved around, lowered his eyes, and helped me button my shirt one by one. If it weren't for him, I wouldn't have noticed that several of my buttons had been torn apart. Maybe it was because I moved too violently when I beat the guy just now. After buttoning my shirt, Samuel smoothed it down and seemed to be caressing my chest. His palm rubbed heavily against the sensitive area of my chest through the fabric. I shuddered and squeezed his wrist hard. Samuel looked at me with his beautiful and calm eyes. He asked, Uncle Phillips, why don't you come home these days? I said, busy. Where is the busyness actually? I simply didn't want to face him. I raised him by myself. When I first met him, he was just a little kid. After Matthew died, I raised him as my own son. How could I have such evil thoughts about him? Even if it was just a normal physiological reaction, it would be in vain for him to call me uncle. Samuel asked, What are you busy with? You are so busy that you can't even go home. I let go of his hand and said, Anyway, I'll be back when I'm done. You should go home first. This is not the place for you. I thought Samuel would be as obedient as usual, but I didn't expect that this time he would completely confront me. I'll wait for you, he said. I'll leave when you're done and come back with me. This kid, he has really grown too powerful and is becoming increasingly difficult to understand. I frowned and looked at him for a few seconds. He was not afraid at all. I was very annoyed for a moment, so I said, It's up to you, and went into the office. I had an appointment with some friends in the evening, so I changed my clothes and left. Then, from the hotel to the nightclub, Samuel actually followed me all night. He didn't go into the box, but just stood outside waiting. Every time I open the door, I see his eyes glued to me. But he doesn't say anything, just purses his lips and argues with me. When I go to the bathroom, he will follow me step by step. I almost laughed out of anger and said, Why don't you just help me support it again? I don't know if he wanted to piss me off on purpose, but he actually held half of my body and stretched out his hand. I was so scared that I stuffed it back immediately, staring at him and yelling, Idiot! Get out of here! Can't you pee? Samuel glanced down expressionlessly. Then he made a soft hush sound from his mouth, like coaxing a child. Depend on. My face suddenly felt hot for no reason, so I had to give up on the urinal, hide in the cubicle, and slam the door shut. Relying on my kindness to him, he is becoming more and more lawless. Sooner or later, I will teach him a lesson. 06. Drinking is inevitable at social events. When the party ended, I was already feeling dizzy and was helped into a room upstairs by a waiter named Brian. Brian is a young boy with a pretty face. He was bullied by a customer before, and I passed by and helped him. He seemed to remember it very much, and every time I came, he would specially switch to my private room to serve me. He had tested me several times and was generally clear about my orientation. I vaguely knew that he wanted to follow me, but I didn't expect him to be so bold. That day, while I was dizzy, he knelt in front of me and reached out to take off my belt. I haven't been around anyone these years. First, the situation in Hong Kong has changed dramatically since Matthew left. I wanted to clean up some of the business of the society, so I was too busy to think about these things. Second, after all, liking men is not something that can be put on the table. It is rare to meet the same kind of person, and if I don't meet one, I am too lazy to look for one. Although it is not my subjective wish, but because of this, I have indeed been celibate for many years. I thought of Samuel again. Then I felt that I was probably being abstinent to the point of being abnormal, and maybe I should vent occasionally. I pulled Brian's hair and looked at him for a while. He called me softly, James? I pushed his face towards me. When the zipper was pulled all the way down, the door slammed open. Samuel came in with a gloomy face. Without saying a word, he grabbed Brian's hair and slammed his head against the edge of the bed. Brian screamed in fear, and the next second he was thrown out. The door closed with a loud bang, as if the whole room was shaking. I angrily asked, "What are you crazy about?" Samuel glanced at my crotch and asked me coldly, "Is this why you don't want to go home? Don't you want to be a widow to your father? What nonsense are you talking about? Are you still hungry and want to eat anything? Samuel!" I warned him sharply. "Then why don't you let me do it?" After saying that, Samuel pushed me hard onto the bed and almost rudely pushed my legs apart with his knees. Then he knelt in the middle and pulled most of my pants down in one go. I was completely sober, kicked him away, got up and yelled, "You took the wrong medicine. Do you still know who I am to you?" "Of course I know." Samuel seemed calm, but he said something that made me vomit blood. "You are my father's brother, the one who wants to climb into my father's bed." I was so angry that I slapped him, and my palm felt numb and painful. Samuel's face turned to the side, and he remained motionless for a long time. There were bright red fingerprints on his face, and even blood was flowing from his lips. I took a deep breath, pulled up my pants and lit a cigarette. When the cigarette burned out and I calmed down a little, I wondered if I had been too harsh just now, and touched his face with heartache. "I'm sorry," I sighed. "Samuel, I didn't teach you well enough. It's not true that the upper beam is crooked and the lower beams are crooked, right? But I never showed him that I liked men. Matthew hates gays so much. I think if his spirit in heaven saw all this, he would turn into a ghost and hack me to death." "I'm not your son," Samuel looked at me calmly. "You have no obligation to teach me well. But I have always regarded you as my son." "Yeah." After hearing what I said, Samuel's eyes flickered for a moment, and then he smiled slightly. "Then why did you break away from your son's arms and hide in the bathroom to take a shower a few days ago? Who was I in your heart at that time?" 07. Who else could it be? It was Samuel, Adam's son, the offspring of the man I loved and another woman. His eyebrows and eyes are chaotic and clear. They are not alike but also similar. When Samuel grew up, I couldn't help but look at him intently, trying to find the shadow of Adam's youth in his facial features. Did I really use this 18-year-old boy as a stand-in? I don't know. I only know that it is abnormal for me to fall in love with a man. If I really did squeeze out some warmth from this man's son, that is my own business, a private matter, something that does not need to be put into action and should not implicate him. Men are not mature yet and are always impulsive, easily confusing dependence, need, passion, and love. I think it's time to send Samuel away. In my plan, he should have gone abroad for further studies. I have been fighting and killing people all the way, and I have committed many sins. Although I can barely be considered a businessman now, it is not the best choice for him to stay with me. I wanted to have a good talk with Samuel. But after that night, for about a month, we didn't eat at the same table or sit down to have a good conversation. I could never find the opportunity. Brian came to me a few more times. But that kind of feeling can never happen again. I lost the heart and advised him to find another good person. No matter how unwilling he was, he had to give up. Later, I don't know who leaked the news in advance, but when Samuel finally came to me and broke into my office, he asked me, "Uncle Phillips, you're sending me abroad?" He is on vacation and no longer wears school uniform. He is wearing a jacket and jeans, looking so young and handsome. I dropped my pen and looked up at him across the desk. "You don't even need to knock when you enter now?" Samuel pursed his lips. "Don't you want me again?" I said, "It's not that I don't want you, it's just that you've grown up and it's time for you to go out and fly on your own." Samuel looked at me helplessly but stubbornly and clenched his fists at his sides. I sighed, stood up, walked to his side, and pried open his fingers one by one. "I'm thinking about you, what's the point of staying with me?" I said it was good. "You are such a good student, you should go see the wider world. Hong Kong is big enough, let the loan me, how much land can I occupy?" "Samuel!" I was helpless. He suddenly grabbed me with his backhand and asked, "Are you going to let me go no matter what?" I didn't hesitate and said, "Yes." "Okay," he smiled coldly, "since you want me to obey, you should also give me some benefits." Samuel kissed her hard. His voice was cold, his eyes were red, but his lips and tongue were hot as fire. The new company was listed and its new address was located high up in a high-end office building in the port city, with 180-degree panoramic glass windows. He kissed me and pushed me over there. The window was open and he pressed my upper body against the window. The wind whistled in my ears and the city lay beneath me. I was born into the wrong family. Samuel bit my neck and murmured, I shouldn't be his son. His hands held me in check and he moved his lips and teeth down to my breasts, rubbing and sucking them through my shirt. Can I call you Daddy? That way you won't be able to leave me and you'll be responsible for me for the rest of your life. The sun was shining brightly, and for a moment, it seemed as if the entire city's people were looking at me, watching how this young man who called me Daddy was kneading me and kissing me until my legs went limp. My heart was thumping loudly, and then it fell again as if it was weightless. That's enough, Samuel. I heard myself say hoarsely. Samuel pretended not to hear. I bent my knees and pushed hard between his legs. He bent over in pain, and then I finally pulled away. I calmed my breath and said to him, You are still young. When you grow up, you will find that many of your feelings are wrong. Many of the things that seem like the end of the world to you now are actually dash. Have you grown up? Samuel interrupted me, and realized that your feelings about my dad were wrong? I was stunned. You don't have to teach me this. Samuel's face was pale, and his expression returned to his usual indifference, but there were tears in his eyes, betraying him. James, he said, addressing me by name as if it was the first time, if you don't want me, then I don't want you either. I paused in taking out a cigarette and said nothing. By the time the cigarette started to smoke in my mouth, Samuel had already left. Soon it will be the anniversary of Matthew's death. 6 years ago, he was framed by another person who was competing with him for the top position in the society at that time, and was buried in the sea with no place to retrieve his body. I bought a feng shui piece of land for him in the cemetery and built a cenotaph for him. I came to see it from time to time in the first 2 years, but later I was busy with various things and the frequency of visits gradually decreased. In the past 2 years, it has only been once a year. I was also on the boat where Matthew had the accident. I remember that he desperately protected me in the hail of bullets, holding my face with his blood-stained hands, and he said to me anxiously, Don't you have a lot of ideas and aspirations? Didn't you tell me that times are changing and we can't just fight and kill each other when we are in a gang? June, I have never been to school and I don't understand what you are talking about, but you are so smart, I know you can do it. They're coming for me. I'll attract their attention. You'll have a chance to escape. Go, go, go and do what you said. I shook my head frantically and said I didn't want it. Without you, all the things I did were meaningless. If we were going to die, let's die together. He slapped me hard, trying to wake me up, and then hugged me tightly. I hate hearing the words, die together, the most. James, listen, I want you to live. I want you to live well. Explosions were heard all over the ship. He put on the only remaining life jacket for me and pushed me into the sea with all his strength. For more than 2,000 nights since then, I have dreamt countless times of those few brief seconds when he pushed me away and I hit the sea. The sea breeze was howling, thick smoke was billowing, and flames shot up into the sky behind him, illuminating his face for a moment. His face was covered in blood, but I knew he was smiling at me. Before falling, I heard him say, I am very happy to be your brother in this life. After falling, he screamed at the top of his lungs, Don't give up. James, don't die. I really survived. But when I just escaped death, I still felt that there was no meaning in living. My parents are both bad people. Giving birth to me was like a practical joke to them, just to make one more person suffer in this world. They are all drug addicts, and they will do anything when they are high. Sometimes when I came home, I saw the house in a mess, with several bodies piled up together, and the air was filled with a disgusting smell, and I felt extremely nauseous in my stomach. One day, in order to seek extreme excitement, they injected drugs into my mother's aorta, and she died of convulsions. My father held the syringe in his hand, with a crazy, weird smile on his face. He held me down and wanted to take me to climb to bliss together. I didn't want to get involved with that stuff. I screamed and struggled hard. In great fear, I picked up an ashtray nearby and smashed it hard on his head. I don't know how many times I hit it. I only know that it was the result of more than 10 years of pain, more than 10 years of despair, and more than 10 years of endurance. Blood splattered all over my head and face, and my father gradually became motionless. I pushed him over with force, stood between the two corpses, and vomited continuously and vigorously until my internal organs seemed to be crushed by the force. I suddenly felt that I had vomited out a pool of broken flesh and blood. Late that night, I ran out of the house. In a nearby alley, he ran headfirst into Matthew's arms. That wasn't the first time we met. Before that, I accidentally met him when he was being hunted by his enemies. I helped him hide and carried him to the clinic covered in blood. He said that he owed me a huge favor. I killed someone and was shaking with fear. He wiped the blood off my face with his hand, asked me what happened, and then told me, "It's okay, don't be afraid, Matthew will help you." That was more than 10 years ago. The Hong Kong city was in such chaos that there seemed to be no law. A drug-addicted couple in the slums died and disappeared, and no one cared at all. Matthew burned down the house, and my parents died in the fire as a matter of course, and no one investigated. After that, I followed Matthew. We went through life and death together, shed blood and sweat for each other, and used the same cigarette to relieve the pain when we were injured. I met Adam when I was 15, and I never thought that after I saved him once when we first met, he would give me his life in return. 09. There is no one else in this world that I care about except Matthew. He doesn't know how important he is to me. Without him, I would have no intention of planning for the future because I would have no future at all. In fact, I only have a little cleverness, so how can I talk about lofty ambitions? If there is, it is because I want to walk out of the shadows with him and move towards a bright life. After Matthew died, my support was gone. I am very conflicted. He tried his best to give me a chance to live. If he wanted me to live, then I dare not die. But I don't dare to die, and I really don't want to live. I ran home from the hospital and locked myself in the room, not knowing what to do with my life. I just stayed there without eating or drinking, as if I was standing still and time was standing still too. Until one day, with a creaky sound, the door was pushed open from the outside, light came in, and Samuel stood in the light. He was 12 years old at that time, but there was no trace of innocence on his face. He asked me, "Uncle Phillips, do you not want me anymore?" I sat on the ground and looked up at him. His expression was so calm, which was not what one would expect from a man of his age. My lips trembled and tears burst out of my eyes in an instant. That was the first time I cried freely after Matthew left. After I finished crying while hugging Samuel, he asked me again, "I cooked some instant noodles. Do you want to have some?" I ate it. After we finished eating, I said to Samuel, "Don't worry, I won't abandon you." Samuel nodded and said, "Then I won't abandon you either." Afterwards, I avenged Matthew, took the position of the leader of the society, successfully established my foothold, and steadily whitewashed the society's business. And Samuel grew up day by day. Sitting in front of Matthew's tombstone, I burned paper money for him and said, "I still couldn't bring Samuel to see you this year. I wonder if you are curious." Anyway, he is an adult now. He is so annoying recently. He almost pissed me off to death. Oh. I sighed. The wind blew up the ashes in the basin, and they flew all over my face. I wondered if Matthew was expressing his dissatisfaction with me for leading his son astray. In fact, the relationship between them as father and son is not very deep. After Matthew died, Samuel never came to see it once. According to him, it was just a tombstone and nothing to see. But I can understand that. No matter how good and loyal Matthew is to his brothers, it cannot change the fact that he is not a good father. Samuel's mother is Elizabeth Peterson, one of Matthew's girlfriends. They got together quickly and broke up just as quickly. Their love was like lightning, which disappeared as soon as it struck. Matthew never knew that she had given birth to a child without telling him, and was shocked when she came to his house with someone. That year, Samuel was 5 years old, Matthew was 23, and I was even younger, only 17. Elizabeth also became a mother at the age of 18. She was young and careless at that time, And her pregnancy was not very obvious, so she just thought she was getting fat. By the time she found out she was pregnant, she was already very old, so she gritted her teeth and gave birth to the baby. She regretted it after giving birth. She never let Samuel call her mother, and always told others that Samuel was her younger brother. She loves to play and has many boyfriends, some of whom are good and some are bad. Some of them often think Samuel is a nuisance. After reluctantly raising Samuel for 5 years, she finally couldn't stand this little burden anymore and wanted to return him to his biological father. That day, Matthew was smoking a cigarette and asked impatiently, "How do I know if you are lying to me? If you are lying to me, wouldn't I be the one who got cheated?" Elizabeth glared at him fiercely. "If you don't believe me, go get a paternity test. Anyway, I have taken good care of this child for you for 5 years, and now it's your turn." 5-year-old Samuel stood aside, listening with a blank expression. Later, Elizabeth left, and Matthew searched Hong Kong but couldn't find her. He heard that she went to the mainland with a rich boss, and when she left, she was picked up by a luxury car, looking radiant. And Samuel, like a speck of dust she found when she changed into new clothes, was gently brushed away by her. Also that year, Matthew took Samuel out to eat, but they were provoked and got into a fight in the restaurant, leaving Samuel forgotten under the table. Perhaps this incident was a bad start, and Samuel and he could never get close again. Matthew himself didn't know how to get along with his son, and often seemed to escape and leave him to me. I said that I treated Samuel as my son and it wasn't like I was taking advantage of him. After all, I really did pick him up from school, really helped him carry his school bag, really helped him attend parent-teacher meetings, and really let him sleep on my back. I think Samuel is right. He will not abandon me, so it is he who allows me to find support in this world. We all need each other's needs. But I didn't expect that as time went by, his needs would change. Well, I sighed again and threw the last stack of paper money into the brazier. This time I didn't dare to say it out loud. I just said to myself, "I'm sorry, Matthew. I really didn't teach him that." He was staring at the fire in a daze when his men came over with a mobile phone in hand. I pressed the answer button, and Daniel's anxious voice came from the other end of the receiver. "Boss, Master Samuel is missing." Samuel is missing and has been kidnapped. But there was no one in Hong Kong that I couldn't find, and that night I got the exact news. I originally thought it would be some enemy who was so immoral that he brought disaster to my family, but I didn't expect it to be a young man named Xan Fu. I had no impression of this person until I saw the photo. Then I realized that he was the one who was beaten up by several of Samuel's friends for harassing Samuel, and whose ribs were broken by Samuel. At that time, I asked someone to clean up the mess. Daniel saw that he looked like a scholar and was badly injured. He was afraid that if he continued to beat him, someone would die, so he just threatened and warned him fiercely. Most people would be scared at this point. Although the gangs have been trying to do legitimate business in recent years and there have been fewer fights and gun battles, the underworld is still the underworld and few people dare to mess with it. This kid Xan Fu is really fucking brave. No, it's not that I have guts. When I walked into the abandoned fishing boat, all the anxiety, worry, and anger towards Xan Fu turned into the same swear word, damn. This guy has fucking mental problems. He stripped Samuel and tied him to a chair, but he himself was dressed neatly. I saw him caressing Samuel's face, tenderly saying, "Samuel, my baby, how long are you going to endure this?" The next second he was like a madman, "Please, please beg me." She also grabbed Samuel's hair and said, "Baby, I don't want to force you. As long as you ask me, I will definitely." Bang! I was so angry that I kicked him several meters away. He didn't feel relieved until he broke the wooden stick he picked up. But never mind, I have to take Samuel home first. Xan Fu fed Samuel a very powerful drug, wanting to see Samuel being tortured by desire until he lost control and begged, tearing off his cold mask and revealing his primitive animal nature, so that he could control him from a superior position for once. But Samuel held on stubbornly, preferring to endure until death rather than speak or fulfill his wish. In the car, Samuel was sweating all over and leaning on my shoulder, almost exhausted. He called me and I answered him. He buried his face deeper into my body, his lips pressed against the skin of my neck, his breath was hot, which made me skip a beat. I finally made it home, and as soon as the door was closed, Samuel pushed me towards me and kissed me. His tongue forcefully pried open my teeth. My legs seemed to go weak for a moment, and he knocked me to the ground with great force. Don't do that. I dodged his kiss in embarrassment and grabbed his jaw hard to push him away. His eyes were burning red, his chest was heaving violently, and beads of sweat were dripping down his skin. I didn't dare look directly into the desire in his eyes. It would be dangerous to look at it for even a second longer. "Can I call a doctor for you?" I said. "Don't bother the doctor." Samuel gritted his teeth, veins popping out at his forehead. "I'd rather endure it until I die. I know he can do it. Whenever he wanted to, he would find a way to force me. After all, he was only a teenager and he dared to shoot himself." That year was the 3rd year after Matthew was buried, and I finally found a good opportunity to avenge him. The man was driven into desperation and seriously injured me before he died. I had a close call with death, but Samuel didn't treat me well. He looked at me coldly and said, "To avenge him, are you willing to sacrifice your own life?" I explained, "This happened by accident, and I didn't mean to do it." Samuel pursed his lips and said, "Then can you please not get hurt again in the future?" I had clearly promised him and said, "Okay," but he thought it was not enough. He suddenly snatched the gun and pulled the trigger before I could react. There was a bloody hole on his shoulder. I was shocked and in pain, but he seemed not to feel any pain and let the bright red liquid flow out of the bloody hole. "Uncle Phillips, you said that we depend on each other, so our lives are connected, and our pain is also connected. When you are hurt, I feel pain." At that time he would force me to learn to cherish my life. Because he knows that I can't forget his blood, and I can't forget him saying that he feels so much pain when I am injured. "I'll help you with my hands." Finally I sighed and compromised, and I knew as soon as I said this that it was just a self-deceiving whitewash. 11. Samuel's tears suddenly fell like raindrops. He kissed me, like it was the last kiss before the end of the world. The root of my tongue was numb, and gradually my brain became numb, as if I had inhaled some kind of hallucinogen, and I fell into dizziness and frenzy. His facial features, which bore some resemblance to a certain face, still deeply stimulated me. When I knew Matthew, he was only a few years older than Samuel is now. "James." Samuel bit me hard to bring me back to my senses. He said, "Call my name." I opened my mouth, but no words came out. I can call him at any time when I am happy, angry, feel sorry for him, or want to teach him a lesson. Only at a moment like this, I can't do it. I'm ashamed to face it. I grabbed Samuel's neck and pressed his head tightly against my neck. "Don't talk. Let's not talk." Perhaps Samuel's tears began to flow at this moment. Tears accompanied his extreme loss of control. I felt like I was going crazy too. My heart was beating so violently as if I was overdrawing my life force. Samuel pushed me to the altar, and on the wall hung a black and white photo of Adam. The tabletop shook, and everything on it fell to the ground with a crash. Samuel was so cruel. He tied my hands with his tie, strangled me from behind, and forced me to look up and look at the pictures on the wall. Sweat stung my eyes. Through my blurred vision, I saw Matthew's smile. He seemed to be staring at me, staring at this absurd and disordered giving and receiving. "Relax, you're too excited." Samuel sneered, and his hand on my waist instantly dug into my skin, causing me pain. "Today is the anniversary of his death. Aren't we being very sorry to him by doing this?" "You." I held back my breath and closed my eyes. "You are so unfilial. Are you saying I'm treating him or you?" Samuel pinched my chin and turned my face towards him. "Daddy, I have tried so hard to make you feel comfortable. What else do I need to be filial?" I shook his hand off with all my strength. His eyes darkened, and he leaned over to cover my mouth. The night was so dark that it couldn't be any darker. The tree branches swayed in the wind, piercing the round moon in the sky. The moon was full and yellow, like a half-cooked egg yolk. When it was pricked by a branch, it burst open, leaving a rich, dark light on the ground. The drug was so effective that I had no idea how long he and I had been doing that in the darkroom. We were so tired that we fell asleep together, without even bothering to put on clothes. We were entangled in each other in the most defenseless, naked, and shameless ways, as if we were tightly entangled in a secret. I woke up before Samuel. He lay on my chest, still seeming uneasy, with his brows slightly furrowed. I stroked his hair, then gently pushed him away and got out of bed to get dressed. There were some sores on both sides of my chest, and I could feel the stinging pain when the fabric of my shirt rubbed against them lightly. Samuel always seems to have a soft spot for this place. I quickly put on my clothes and walked out of the bedroom, only to realize that it was night again, but I didn't know what time it was. After the violent storm passed, the house was in a mess. When I went downstairs, my feet got entangled by the clothes thrown on the stairs and I almost fell down. The black and white photo of Matthew fell to the ground. I couldn't even remember when it fell from the wall. The glass shattered in the frame, cutting his unchanging smile into pieces. I sighed, picked up the photos, put them away, then sat on the sofa and lit a cigarette. I finally made the call after smoking half a pack of cigarettes and throwing the last cigarette butt into the ashtray. "Let's get ready," I said, "to send Samuel away tonight." In 1999, Samuel and I hadn't seen each other for 3 years. After that chaotic night 3 years ago, I had the doctor give him an injection of medicine that put him into a deep sleep, and then I sent him on a plane. In fact, I had already paved all the way for him to go abroad long before that. I wanted to reach a consensus with him, but later I found that we couldn't reach a consensus, so it didn't make any difference whether it was 1 day earlier or 1 day later. He had to leave sooner or later. To prevent him from sneaking back, I had his documents hidden. I thought he would make some trouble after arriving, but he was surprisingly docile and accepted all my arrangements. Just refused to contact me anymore. I sent him away, but I never thought about losing contact with him. I also want to care about his life from time to time like an elder, but he refuses to even answer my calls. He once said that if I didn't want him, he wouldn't want me either. Maybe he really meant it. Later, the news from the other side of the ocean showed that he was doing well there. He studied hard and achieved excellent results. He made many new friends and his life was not boring. But it seems that my concern is unnecessary. When I missed him the most, I flew to El City to see him. Really just to look. At that time, it was snowing heavily in El City. I was sitting in the car and saw him running into the school gate in the snow with a few books in his arms. There was a long flight of stairs in front of their school. A girl wearing a beret and holding an umbrella chased after him. After finally catching up with him, she tripped over the stairs. He immediately raised his hand to hold her up. The girl looked up and smiled at him. The handsome man and beautiful girl, the heavy snow, it was like the most romantic scene in an idol drama. Afterwards, Samuel gentlemanly took the umbrella from the girl, and the two walked side by side under the umbrella and left my sight. I rolled up the car window. This is good, mistakes will eventually be corrected, and this is the youth Samuel should experience. That night, I flew back to Hong Kong. As the century was about to turn and doomsday rumors were rampant, a friend who had returned from the mainland suddenly brought me incredible news. He said that he had seen a man who looked very much like Matthew over there. I packed my luggage as quickly as possible and went through customs and left the port alone. On the way there, I kept reminding myself not to get my hopes up too high. After all, Matthew's black and white photo had been hanging on the wall for nearly 9 years. Even before I found that small town, that street, and that barber shop, I was still thinking this. Until I stepped in. The man in a black shirt who was cutting someone's hair glanced at me and said, "Welcome, would you like a haircut?" The look in his eyes when he looked at me was so strange, as if he was just looking at a customer who happened to walk into his barber shop on a sunny afternoon. But I know he is Adam. His passionate eyes have not changed, but they have a few traces of time. The now very faint scar on his right cheek was still there. It was left accidentally a long, long time ago, so long ago that it seemed like a lifetime ago, when he blocked a knife for me. I tried to swallow my excitement and said, "Yeah, a haircut." So Adam called a younger barber. I asked, "Are you the boss? Can I wait for you?" There was a hint of surprise in Adam's eyes, But he smiled at me quickly. Sure, then you sit down first, I'll just finish cutting your hair. I don't know if this counts as finding him. He has lost his memory and has no memory of me at all. For more than half a month after that, I came to the neighborhood almost every day, sometimes to wash my hair, and sometimes to meet him by chance in a fast food restaurant and chat with him. He probably thought I was a weird person, so he was just being polite to me. Until one night when he had just closed the store, a motorcycle whizzed past and a woman screamed on the street, "My necklace!" I've heard for a long time that motorcycle gangs are rampant in this coastal area. I instinctively ran after him, but Adam had already gotten on his motorcycle and yelled at me, "Get on!" I quickly jumped into the back seat of his car. I stepped on the accelerator to the bottom, hugged Adam's waist, and was almost about to cry because of the night wind. The street scene and time are rapidly retreating. 1 second is 1 year, 2 seconds is 2 years, until we return to a certain year, month, time, and moment. At that time, we were also galloping like this, on the long coastal highway of the port city, stealing a ray of light from the gloomy life. A few blocks later, we successfully caught up with the two bikers. Adam stopped their motorcycle at a street corner, and we fought one at a time, and finally got the gold necklace back. After returning the necklace, Adam leaned against his motorcycle, took out a cigarette box and gave me one, saying, "I didn't expect you to be such a good fighter." I thought to myself, of course, many of these tricks were taught to me by you back then. I said matter-of-factly, "No match for you." He smiled, exhaled a puff of smoke, and shook his head, "I can't do it. In the past 2 years, I often feel that I am old and can't fight anymore." I felt so sad at that moment. 9 years, how could we be separated for 9 years? The jade-faced Yama, who dared to chop people from one end of the alley with just one knife. The friend who had gone through mountains of swords and seas of blood with me. The bloody Adam who tried his best to keep me alive. How could you laugh and sigh that you are getting old, and how could you meet me without knowing me? I was silent for a long time, and suddenly said, "I don't think I've told you before, you're actually like my brother." Adam raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Brother?" "No," I looked at him seriously, "but he is my best brother. He is closer to me than a biological brother. He is about the same age as you." Adam smiled as he dusted off his cigarette. "You may not believe this, but I actually don't even know how old I am." 39. I was firm and he looked confused. I added, if he were still alive, he would be 39 this year. Adam laughed again and said very casually, "Well, since we are so destined to each other, maybe I really am 39? 14. In this strange coastal town, I only got to know Adam, who was already a stranger to me, for one night. It was this night, the night we fought side by side to help someone get the necklace back, that he said he would treat me to a drink. We sat in a busy barbecue stall, just like we had sat in roadside stalls in the port city countless times in the past. After a glass of wine, Adam and I talked about some of our own things. He said that he came here from Hong Kong 8 years ago. There was no special reason. He just came here to work with his friends. He worked in many jobs and later met a very good master who taught him how to cut hair. He then settled down completely and took over this small barber shop, which he used to make a good living. Before coming here, he recuperated in a very remote fishing village in the port city for almost a year. It sounds like a made-up story, right? A person was washed up on the shore half dead, injured, not knowing who he was, where he was, or what had happened, and then was rescued by a kind fisherman. Life is sometimes so dramatic. After hesitating for a moment, I asked softly, "Have you ever thought about regaining your memory?" Adam took a drink and put the glass down. When I was recovering from my injuries, I really didn't have the energy to think about it. But after I came here and slowly started a new life, it didn't matter to me anymore. So, do you want all the people, things, and events from the past few decades? I couldn't help but choke up a little as I spoke. What if there's still someone who can't let go of you? Adam fell silent. Finally, he said, "When I looked in the mirror for the first time after waking up, I found that I had many injuries of varying sizes on my body. I don't know why, but I subconsciously felt that I probably didn't like my previous life very much." He clinked my glass and once again raised his head to drink the wine. I think there must be a reason why God arranged this. I've died once, and if I come back to life again, I'm afraid it will be a disturbance to others. As I looked at him, I suddenly remembered the day when we were both young and old, squatting on the side of the road. I held a cigarette in my mouth, squinting my eyes at the high-rise buildings in Hong Kong, and muttered, "Sometimes I really wonder what it feels like to sit in the clouds." He didn't care about it. Why be curious? It must be so empty up there, not as lively as the ground. Matthew is like this. He has said more than once that he has no ambition. He does not want to fight or engage in intrigue. Stirring up trouble is what smart people do. People like him just want to live an ordinary, healthy, and safe life. But life led him to this path, and love and righteousness pushed him further and further away, with no way to turn back. I think now he should have got the kind of life he wanted, right? Before I knew it, I was drunk. Adam took me back to the hotel room. I was so drunk that I was staggering and tripped over the leg of the bed, dragging him down with me onto the bed. I grabbed his clothes to prevent him from getting up and asked dazedly, "Matthew, are you happy now?" He said, "I am not." "If you were, would you be happy?" "What if?" He said helplessly, "Well, I'm doing fine." "Really?" "Real." I felt his heartbeat, steady and strong. My eyes felt sore and tears flowed uncontrollably. Yes, he is alive, Adam is still alive. Isn't that enough? I let go of my hand. Adam hesitated for a moment, then said to me, "Maybe I'm not in a position to say this, but I think you should let it go. No matter what role that person played in your life, now that you've said goodbye, you have to learn to move on." I was stunned, but I always feel like I owe him a lot. He said, "People are all indebted to each other. If he didn't owe you, how could he be in a relationship with you through life and death?" That night, it was late and Adam was a little dizzy from drinking, so he stayed in my room. I booked a standard room and he slept in another bed with a narrow aisle between us. I looked at his shadow in the dark, thinking back to that night and those days, and felt like this was an ending God had given me. I know that some things and some people will eventually come to an end. The next day, Adam got up early. He had to go home to wash up, so he said hello to me, picked up his coat and left. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" The door opened and I heard his surprised and alert voice. I had just finished brushing my teeth in the bathroom near the door. I put down the cup and walked out. When I raised my eyes, I met the eyes of the young man outside the door who was staring at Adam expressionlessly. "Samuel?" 15. Samuel watched Adam and James enter the hotel room and then sat outside their door for the entire night. He had just learned a few days ago from the old housekeeper who let the cat out of the bag that his father was suspected to be alive. After that, he worked non-stop for more than 20 hours before finally arriving in this city. He had been angry with James for 3 years and prepared himself mentally for 3 years, but in the end he was defeated by the fear of losing. He still remembered the day 3 years ago when he woke up 10,000 meters in the sky. Outside the plane's window, the clouds were dyed light gold, with pure blue underneath. Looking over there, I felt the view suddenly brighten up, turning into a blurry white. Just like his brain that went blank for a moment. He asked the old butler who had moved abroad with him, "Thomas, where is this?" After asking, he felt stupid. "Where is this?" "This is on the plane." The plane was carrying him away from Hong Kong City, away from James, and he even knew where the destination was. It was a distant country, more than 10,000 kilometers away from James. He could not measure it with his legs and his eyes could not reach it, but James said there was a wider world there. James said, "I am doing this for your own good." But how could James forget? He said that they depended on each other. How can we depend on each other when we are separated by a vast sea of people? Samuel sat there numbly, thinking it doesn't matter, his feet are on his own legs, he can go back by himself. But he didn't expect that James was so cruel that he even hid his ID. The meaning was obvious. He could not return to Hong Kong City without permission. That day, Samuel squatted in front of his messy luggage, crying. It's not that he didn't think that he would be sent abroad sooner or later, he just hated James for not even giving him a formal farewell and even so casually taking away his freedom to go see him. His fault. He satisfied himself once without considering the consequences, and then lost it completely. During the 3 years in El City, Samuel tried hard to prove to himself that he could live a good life even if he completely cut James out of his life. He made more friends than when he was in Hong Kong City. He thought that the gap in his heart could always be filled by other people. If one was not enough, then 2 or 3 would be enough. He even tried to be in love. Just didn't work out. He found that he seemed to love neither men nor women. When those men and women chased him and his handsome face with infatuated eyes, his heart was filled with confusion. Xan Fu once told him that going against the conventions is true love. But in fact, Samuel still doesn't understand what love and hate are. The secular world had nothing to do with him. He didn't shout or cry out anyway. He felt like he just didn't know how to get closest to James. Samuel has never known what a sense of security is since he was born. His mother asked him to call her sister and never hugged him. When his father met him for the first time, he said, "How do I know if he is my son?" That day, young Samuel was sandwiched between Adam and Elizabeth. When he looked up, he could only see 2 blank faces. What are they talking about? Who is she to him? Then James showed up. Samuel could see his smiling face and hear his voice clearly. He squatted down in front of him and said, "It's too noisy here. Uncle will take you to play outside, okay?" James was only 17 years old at the time, and he took his hand and called himself Uncle. 16. Samuel didn't know when it started, but James was no longer just Uncle Phillips in his heart. Everything in the world has cause and effect, except love, which generally has no cause and effect. When youth begins, many people around us start to have relationships, some serious and some not. In short, they all place their half-hidden and half-exposed desires on others. Samuel listened to their conversation and didn't understand the charm of kissing and hugging that could make people so intoxicated. Until he was 16, when he accidentally opened the bathroom door while James was taking a shower. When James, standing under the water curtain, looked at him in astonishment, he suddenly understood why some people would have a possessive desire for another person's body. He wanted to kiss more than just James' lips, he wanted to kiss him all over. Endless dissatisfaction arises, a hunger that cannot be satisfied by ordinary relationships and ordinary touches. It wasn't that Samuel didn't want to make James feel comfortable, he was even afraid that if he went too far, James would leave no room between them. He had tried very hard to eliminate his hunger in his own way. But compared to James, other people and things are nutrients that cannot be absorbed by his body. Samuel had been starving for 3 years and was on the verge of death. When he heard that Adam had reappeared, he suddenly burst into a strong desire to survive like a dying person. He wanted to be back with James now, immediately, right away. The old butler knew how unhappy he was. When he heard him say that he wanted to return home, he sighed and finally found his ID and handed it to him. After arriving, Samuel searched the streets for people. He felt like he was running and running, as if he had never stopped. On the way, a small tricycle collided head-on with him at the corner of a street. The honest middle-aged driver was so scared that his face turned pale, but he still did not stop. He got up and continued to run. He didn't know that he was covered in dust and had scratches on his palms, knees, and other parts of his body. Those things were temporarily blocked by his senses. Finally, he found where James lived. But he saw Adam, his father who had been buried with great fanfare 6 years ago, holding James, and the 2 of them walked into the hotel together. Samuel's blood froze. He was not at all surprised by his father's resurrection. He just wished his father was still a square tombstone. God knows how outrageous his idea is. Samuel followed him like a lost soul, and when he reached the door, he didn't know why he didn't have the courage to raise his hand and knock. Did he think James finally got what he wanted? Was homophobic Adam finally going to be defeated by a man? There is nothing strange about it because James is just so good, so good. Well, next, they would live together, and he would become the complete outsider, left behind again and again? Winter had just arrived in the southern city. Samuel sat curled up in the cool corridor all night, but he had no idea that he had been sitting all night until the door behind him opened. A squeak, Sound woke him up, awakening his fighting spirit. Why did he come all the way here? To watch the door for them? Samuel stood up suddenly. 17. Adam looked at Samuel suspiciously. My heart tightened, fearing that he would see something from Samuel's face that was somewhat similar to his, so I quickly said, "We know each other, it's okay, you can go back now." Adam didn't say anything else. He took one last look at Samuel and left. I pulled Samuel into the room. I don't know what happened, he looked so miserable and had some big scratches on his face. I couldn't help but raise my hand and gently touched his face. "How did you get yourself into this state? What happened?" Samuel pursed his lips and looked at me without any expression, but he blinked a few times and his eye sockets turned red. "Did you guys go to bed?" "What? Did you kiss? Did you have sex?" Before I could even say anything, he attacked me, rubbing his thumb across my lips heavily, repeatedly, as if trying to wipe off something, and then kissed me fiercely. While kissing, he also pulled off the buttons on my shirt. I didn't know if it was because of lack of sleep or because the reunion after 3 years made me soft-hearted, but he threw me onto the bed and I failed to break free. I felt a chill on my body, and he opened my shirt and put his cold hands on me. "Where did he kiss you?" "Here." Fingertips scraped across my chest. "Here." His palms stroked my waist and abdomen. "Or here." The hand reached the edge of the waistband and reached down. I held him tightly, my voice a little hoarse. "Stop it." Samuel obeyed for a moment, and then he buried his head in my breasts and sucked hard. I couldn't help shaking, grabbed his hair, glared at him and said, "Don't you understand what I'm saying?" His expression was blank. "Why are you so sensitive? Didn't he satisfy you last night? Damn it. It's like talking at cross purposes. Is there nothing else on your mind besides this?" I was completely furious. "Get out of here." "So what's going on in your mind right now?" "I'm curious too." Samuel took off his clothes, tied my wrists together with his clothes, then knelt on the bed with one leg bent, and under my angry glare, slowly pulled down his zipper. Samuel is absolutely crazy. When he took off all his clothes, I realized that he had several bruises and scratches not only on his face, but also on his body. I asked him, "What on earth did you do?" He said casually, "It's okay, I was hit by a car." "What do you mean by being hit by a car, fuck?" The sudden stimulation made my voice tremble and change its tone, and I cursed out loud. Samuel said, "Yeah, okay." When I was clutching the bed sheets and felt my heart was about to break, I finally realized what he was saying. He was fucking mistaking an interjection for a verb. "Fuck you. I haven't seen you for a few years, and you come back to kill me?" I was almost distracted and didn't care whether I used swear words or not. I used to want to be a qualified elder in front of Samuel, but now he manipulated me like this in bed. It seemed like I had enough of pretending and just gave in to depravity. "But don't you like it very much?" Samuel suddenly turned me over, looked me up and down and asked, "Can you let me go now, James? Do you want to let me go?" I said hoarsely, "Get lost." "Okowa." Samuel sneered and actually pulled away. I was so angry that I had no place to vent, so I lit a cigarette and watched him bend down and pick up the clothes scattered on the ground one by one. Damn it. If the little mad dog puts on Zhang Liangzi's human skin and puts on some clothes, he can be a good person? Why are you pretending to be nice to me? Angry. Angry. So fucking mad. I pulled him back hard, and while Samuel fell on the bed, I immediately turned over and sat on his waist, pressing down with the cigarette but burning a hole in his clothes. Samuel frowned but said nothing. I gritted my teeth and said, "Samuel, do you really think I won't get mad at you? You are so disrespectful. Is that what I taught you?" As if I wasn't angry enough, Samuel said, "I don't remember what you taught me." "Then you must study hard today." I narrowed my eyes and emphasized each word. "How to be a gentleman in bed, I will teach you well." I gave Samuel a good lesson. To punish him, I even controlled myself and didn't let him finish. After I was done, I threw him into the bathroom and told him to figure it out while I took a shower. Unexpectedly, he fainted as soon as he came out of the bathroom wrapped in hot steam, which scared me. The doctor said that he had overexerted himself, had a cold, fever, and hypoglycemia. I called the old housekeeper to find out the situation and calculated the time. Only then did I realize how long he had been working nonstop since he came back. After Samuel woke up, I fed him boat porridge. His face was pale, and he looked at me with his dark eyes, which were so dark that you couldn't see the bottom of it. He looked at me intently, and he could see that I was furious. I was annoyed. "Are you really that disrespectful, young master?" He then lowered his head, opened his mouth and took the spoon in my hand. I said, "I haven't eaten or drunk for more than 20 hours, and I came here and got hit by a car, and I have a fever. What's going on? Are you acting out a melodrama with me?" Samuel was silent. "I know you're young and healthy, and you don't care about injuries or pain, but is this how you squander your youth? This time you were lucky and were only hit lightly by the car, but what if you had internal injuries? What if the next time you're hit by a truck? You weren't such a reckless person before, Samuel. Look at me." Samuel had kept his eyelashes drooping, but after hearing what I said, he opened his eyes wide and looked at me. He even dared to show his grievance. He said, "I'm just afraid that you won't want me anymore." These words were like a needle that popped the inflated balloon in me. He pursed his lips. "You and him?" Nothing. I knew what he wanted to say, so I interrupted him and said, "Besides, your father has lost his memory. He doesn't remember me or you. We will go back when you recover. No one should bother him anymore." Amnesia? Samuel was stunned and asked me, "Can you bear to let him go?" I said, "Here is the life he wanted, and I let it go." "What does it mean to let go?" I stirred the porridge in the bowl with a spoon. "Letting go means it's over and it's over. Do you understand?" Samuel blinked. "So do you still want to drink the porridge?" "Drink." A week later, Samuel recovered completely. We set off for Hong Kong. Before leaving, I went to Adam's barber shop to say goodbye to him and probably hugged him for the last time in my life. "Thank you for your care during this time. It's nice to meet you." This was probably the last sentence I said to him in my life. When saying goodbye, Samuel did not come forward, but just stood at the corner diagonally opposite and watched from afar. When I returned to him, he said, "You still seem reluctant to leave him." I shook my head with emotion. "You don't understand. My feelings for Matthew are very complicated. It's not just love as you think." "So you finally admitted that you like him?" At this point, there was nothing to deny. I shrugged and said, "I did like her when I was young, but it was just unrequited love. It's better not to mention it." After walking quietly for a while, Samuel suddenly said, "Is he getting old?" "He is very different now than before. I think he probably longed to be close to his father, but God did not give them the fate to be father and son." "Hate him?" I asked. Samuel was confused for a moment when he heard this. But soon he said firmly, "Hate? The time I hate him the most is when you stare at his photo and can't hear me calling you." I shouldn't have asked. 19. When I returned to Hong Kong, it was already the last month of 1999. On Christmas Eve, Samuel was invited to a dance and came back obviously a little drunk. I was looking at the account books in the study when he came in, sat on the sofa opposite the desk, and stared at me without blinking. I ignored him and continued turning the pages. He suddenly spoke, "Come here." I looked at him with amusement. "Master, you are so arrogant, ordering me around?" His voice softened. "James, come here. You are really becoming more and more unruly." I walked over and sat down next to him. He was dressed very handsomely today, in a well-tailored black suit, without a tie, but with a button on his collar and a thin chain in the middle dangling and shining under his Adam's apple. I was just about to reach out and brush it off when I noticed a hint of foundation and lipstick on his suit jacket, which was not noticeable because of the dark color of the jacket. I sniffed it closely. "It looks like you have a beautiful lady with you tonight. Fresh and elegant perfume, smells good." Samuel was a little slow to react, and seemed to think for a moment before he murmured, "Maybe it was Jessie?" "Oh," I said, "it's the girl with the sweet voice." "Samuel, we didn't have anything. She just said she was really going to give up on me and hoped I could give her a last hug." I wiped off the remaining traces of makeup and joked, You are not such a soft-hearted person. Samuel paused, but I share the same pain as her. We are all chasing someone we shouldn't be chasing. Samuel's expression darkened. I poured him a cup of warm water. He drank half of it and suddenly seemed to remember something. He looked at me strangely and said, "How do you know Jessie is a girl with a sweet voice?" Ah. I was caught off guard. I just said it casually. I didn't expect that this kid, even when he was drunk, could still find loopholes in my words. I said, "That's what I heard." "Who told you that?" "I met her after I went to El City." "You shouldn't know her. It's Thomas and the others." "You're all alone in such a faraway place, so of course I want to ask about your recent situation and what friends you've made. What is the important feature of having a sweet voice? Is this worth mentioning?" Samuel was not stupid, he would not be fooled by me. He leaned forward and looked at me closely. "Have you been to El City, seen her, heard her voice?" In fact, I went to El City to see him many times later. He even refused to answer my calls, and I really missed him, so I had to take the trouble to fly to him again and again. I didn't want him to know. I once firmly believed that time and distance could correct everything, and I didn't want him to think that there was any possibility that I could respond to him. But 3 years later, the correction appears to have failed. Seeing that I didn't answer, Samuel changed the question. "Have you ever thought about me in these 3 years?" He said, "I do. I think about you every day. I think about you when I eat, when I go to class, when I walk, and even when I dream. I thought I could stop thinking about you slowly, just like you wanted me to, but my heart won't listen to me and I can't do it." My heart suddenly became soft. Okay. There was no other way. I really couldn't not compromise. "I admit, I went to see you, and I missed you too." Samuel's eyes lit up. "Then can you kiss me once?" I finally got what I wanted and pulled the thin chain dangling from his collar. "Then kiss him." In fact, in 100 years of life, love is just a very small thing. Admit that you have feelings for him, the sun will rise as usual, the city will not fall. If someone insists on blaming him, then, fuck you. On the last night of 1999, Samuel insisted on spending time with me in bed. At midnight, the end of the world did not come. The century changed once every 1,000 years, and the whole city was cheering. Samuel kissed me as the fireworks burst. His tongue entwined with mine, and his intense heartbeat resonated with mine. At that cross-century moment, we seemed to merge into the same person. When I was so tired that I was drowsy, I suddenly felt a chill on my fingertips. Samuel put a ring on my right index finger. I opened my 5 fingers and looked at it. I smiled and said, "You hid my ring before, didn't you?" Samuel looked down at me and asked, "I didn't throw it away. Do you want it?" I yawned and said, "Forget it. It's troublesome to wear so many rings. Just keep your dad's things for yourself." Samuel curved his eyes and kissed me. Then he lay down beside me, his hands restlessly fiddling with my eyelashes. I smiled with my eyes closed, then reached out and held him in my arms. "Go to sleep, baby. Happy 21st century."